Death by Gingerbread House, a Hamish Macbeth mystery. Good evening, dear listeners. My name is Stephen, and welcome to Mindful Musings. I invite you to settle in with a warm drink, perhaps by a window where snow drifts softly past, or near a fire that fills the room with the scent of pine and comfort. Tonight, I bring you a tale from the Scottish Highlands on the eve of Christmas, where festive cheer masks darker intentions and sweetness conceals bitter truths. Our story takes us to the village of Lochdubh, where Police Constable Hamish Macbeth keeps watch over his beloved territory. Through his eyes, we will witness a mystery that begins with the death of a celebrated baker and wins its way through years of secrets, betrayal, and revenge served cold as winter itself. Do you enjoy a mystery when the world outside sparkles with frost and possibility? If so, I would be honoured to have you subscribe and join me on future journeys into the shadows of the Highlands. Now, settle in. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The House Made of Sugar and Lies. Christmas Eve had arrived in Lochdubh with all the magic the season promised. Fresh snow blanketed the hills, the loch reflected a sky heavy with more to come, and every window in the village glowed with warm light and festive decoration. Police Constable Hamish Macbeth stood in his kitchen, watching the afternoon light fade while his dog Lug sat hopefully by the oven, where a somewhat lopsided attempt at shortbread was baking. It was the sort of day that made Hamish grateful for his stubborn refusal to accept promotion to Strathbane. Let Detective Chief Inspector Blair spend Christmas Eve dealing with drunk drivers and domestic disputes in the city. Hamish had this peace, this beauty, and the knowledge that his evening would likely involve nothing more demanding than attending the village Christmas party at the church hall. The shortbread timer rang, and Hamish pulled out a tray of cookies that looked more like abstract art than traditional Scottish baking. Lugs gave them a dubious look, and Hamish could not blame him. His culinary skills had not improved despite years of living alone. He was contemplating whether to bring them to the party anyway when his mobile phone rang. The sound seemed wrong somehow on Christmas Eve, and Lugs looked up with what Hamish swore was concern in his mismatched eyes. It was the Reverend Macpherson, and the man's usually cheerful voice was strained with shock. "Hamish, you need to come to Campbell's bakery immediately. It is Moira Campbell. I am afraid something terrible has happened." Hamish felt his peaceful evening dissolve like sugar in hot water. "I will be right there." Campbell's bakery sat on the high street, a charming stone building that had been the heart of Lochdubh's baking scene for 3 generations. Moira Campbell had taken over from her mother 15 years ago and had elevated the business to something approaching art. Her gingerbread houses were legendary. Throughout Sutherland, elaborate creations that won competitions and drew customers from as far as Inverness. The bakery's windows were usually bright and inviting, displaying Moira's latest creations. But as Hamish approached, he saw the lights were on. But the door stood slightly ajar, and the Reverend Macpherson waited outside with a face as pale as the snow beneath his feet. "I came to collect the gingerbread house for the village competition tonight," the minister explained, his breath making white clouds in the cold air. "The door was unlocked, and when I called out, there was no answer. I found her in the back, in the kitchen." "Hamish, it is dreadful." They entered together, and the smell hit Hamish immediately. The usual warm scent of baking bread and cinnamon was there, but underneath it was something else. Something bitter and chemical that made his instincts flare with warning. The front of the bakery was pristine, ready for Christmas morning customers who would never come. Display cases gleamed and the register sat closed and balanced. But when they moved through to the kitchen, Hamish stopped short. Moira Campbell lay on the tiled floor between the industrial ovens and the work counter. She was 52 years old, a handsome woman known for her precise nature and demanding standards. Her dark hair was pulled back in its customary bun, and she wore the white baker's coat she was never without while working. But her face was dusted with powdered sugar, as if someone had sifted it over her like snow. Her eyes were open and staring, her mouth slightly parted, and her expression was one of surprise and pain. One hand was extended toward the counter above her, as if she had been reaching for something when she fell. Hamish knelt carefully beside her, checking for a pulse he knew he would not find. Her skin was cold and rigor mortis had begun to set in. She had been dead for several hours at least. Do not touch anything else, he told the minister gently. I need to call this in. While he waited for Dr. Brodie and the scene of crime team from Strathbane, Hamish studied the kitchen with careful attention. The room was in disarray, which seemed wrong for someone as meticulous as Moira. Bowls of royal icing sat on the counter, some still with spatulas in them. Piping bags lay scattered, and in the centre of the large work table, destroyed beyond recognition, was what had clearly been an elaborate gingerbread house. The structure had been smashed deliberately. Hamish could see that immediately. Walls were crushed, the roof lay in pieces, and delicate decorations were ground into crumbs. Whoever had destroyed it had done so with violence, with rage. Royal icing was smeared across the table, and pieces of gingerbread were scattered across the floor. Dr. Brodie arrived within 20 minutes, bringing with him the calm professionalism that had made him Lochdubh's trusted physician for decades. He examined Moira carefully, then looked up at Hamish with troubled eyes. Heart attack, possibly, but something is not right. Look at her lips. They have a faint blue tinge. And that smell, do you notice it? Almonds. Very faint, but definitely there. Hamish did smell it now that the doctor mentioned it. Bitter almonds. A smell he had read about in detective novels but never encountered in his quiet Highland village. Cyanide, Dr. Brodie said quietly. I cannot be certain until the post-mortem, but the signs are there. The bitter almond smell, the rapid onset, the way she fell. If I am right, this was not an accident, Hamish. This was murder. Chapter 2. The competition that turned deadly. The scene of crime team arrived from Strathbane as darkness fell completely, bringing with them lights and equipment and the sort of grim efficiency that turned a place of warmth into something clinical and cold. Detective Chief Inspector Blair came too, of course, because a murder on Christmas Eve was too dramatic for him to resist, even if it meant leaving his holiday celebrations. Macbeth, he bellowed as he entered the bakery, his face already red from the cold and possibly from the whiskey Hamish could smell on his breath. What have you got yourself into now? Could you not have let the woman die peacefully? Must everything in your village turn into a bloody murder? Hamish bit back his irritation and led Blair through what he had found. The destroyed gingerbread house drew particular attention from the detective inspector, who stared at the wreckage with something approaching confusion. So someone killed a baker and smashed her gingerbread house, Blair said slowly. What is this? Some sort of fairy tale gone wrong? What is next? Poison apples? Dr. Brodie believes she was poisoned with cyanide, Hamish said patiently, hidden in something she ingested. Given that she was found in her bakery, surrounded by baking ingredients, I would suggest the poison was in something she ate or tasted while working. Blair grunted. The post-mortem will tell us. In the meantime, who had access to this place? Who would want to kill a baker on Christmas Eve? That is what I intend to find out, Hamish replied. After Blair had finished making a nuisance of himself and returned to Strathbane with the scene of crime team, Hamish locked the bakery carefully and headed to the church hall, where the Christmas party had been delayed but not cancelled. The villagers deserved to know what had happened, and Hamish needed to see their reactions. The hall was decorated with tinsel and holly, and a large Christmas tree stood in the corner, but the usual festive atmosphere was muted. News of Moira's death had spread, as news always did in Lochdubh, and faces were solemn as Hamish entered. The Curry sisters descended on him immediately, their eyes bright with horrible curiosity. Is it true? Jessie asked in a whisper that carried across the room. Was Moira murdered? I cannot comment on an ongoing investigation, Hamish said firmly. But I will need to speak with anyone who saw Moira yesterday or today. A young woman stepped forward from the crowd, and Hamish recognised her as Fiona MacLeod, Moira's apprentice for the past 3 years. She was in her late 20s, with red hair and a spattering of freckles across her pale face. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a handkerchief in her hands. I saw her yesterday afternoon, Fiona said, her voice trembling. I was helping her finish the gingerbread house for the competition. It was her masterpiece, the most elaborate one she had ever made, a replica of Lochdubh itself, with every building detailed perfectly. She had been working on it for weeks. What time did you leave? Hamish asked gently. Around 6 in the evening. Moira said she wanted to work alone to do the final decorating, She was very particular about the details. She told me to go home and enjoy Christmas Eve with my family. How did she seem? Normal, focused, maybe a bit stressed, but that was usual for Moira when she was completing an important project. She had high standards, very high. Hamish made notes, watching Fiona's face carefully. Did she have any enemies? Anyone who might wish her harm? Fiona hesitated, and something flickered across her face. Moira was not always easy to work with. She could be demanding, critical. But murder? I cannot imagine who would do such a thing. The Reverend Macpherson joined them, still looking shaken. The Gingerbread house competition has been cancelled, of course. It seems grotesque to continue under the circumstances. Moira was almost certain to win. She won every year for the past decade. Who were the other competitors? Hamish asked. The minister consulted a list. There were 5 entries this year. Moira, of course. Then Fiona MacLeod, Mrs. Wellington from the manse, young Jamie Ross from the hotel, and Douglas Kerr, the new baker who opened that shop in Brakey last year. Hamish felt a small tingle of interest at the last name. Douglas Kerr, a rival baker. Tell me about this Douglas Kerr. The Curry sisters exchanged glances, and Nessie spoke up eagerly. He is from Lochdubh originally. His family ran the bakery here before the Campbells took over. There was some sort of scandal. Oh, it must be 20 years ago now. The Kerr family lost everything. What sort of scandal? Hamish pressed. Chapter 3. The Recipe for Revenge. The story of the Kerr family bakery came out in pieces, as village stories always did, assembled from gossip and memory and the Curry sisters' encyclopedic knowledge of local history. Hamish sat in the church hall listening as the past unfolded. Douglas Kerr's parents, Robert and Jean Kerr, had run the Lochdubh bakery for 30 years, Nessie Curry explained. They were well loved, their bread and cakes were famous throughout the county. But then something happened, something that destroyed them. There was a competition, Jessie added, nodding vigorously. The Highland Baking Championship, in Inverness, 20 years ago. John Kerr was going to enter her signature recipe, the one that had been in her family for generations, a special Christmas cake with a unique blend of spices. But the night before the competition, Jean fell ill, Nessie continued. Food poisoning, the doctors said. She could not compete. And then Moira Campbell, who was just starting to make a name for herself then, entered a Christmas cake that tasted remarkably similar to Jean's recipe. Moira won the competition, Jessie said, and the publicity from that win launched her career. Within a year, she had expanded her mother's small bakery and started winning every competition she entered. The Kerr family, meanwhile, never recovered. Jean claimed Moira had stolen a recipe, but she had no proof. What happened to them? Hamish asked. They went bankrupt within 2 years, Nessie replied. The stress killed John, and Robert drank himself to death not long after. Young Douglas was sent to live with relatives in Glasgow. He only returned to the area last year, opened a bakery in Brakey. Hamish felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to form. A family destroyed, a recipe allegedly stolen, and 20 years later the accused thief dead on Christmas Eve with her masterpiece destroyed. It was the sort of revenge that simmered slowly before boiling over. He left the church hall and drove through the snow to Brakey, a larger town about 10 miles from Lochdubh. Kerr's bakery sat on the main street, its windows dark for the holiday. Hamish peered through the glass and saw a small, neat shop, nothing as elaborate as Campbell's bakery, but clean and professional. The flat above the shop had lights on, and when Hamish knocked on the side door, it was answered by a man in his early 30s with dark hair and tired eyes. Douglas Kerr looked like someone who had known hardship and had not quite shaken its shadow. Mr. Kerr, Hamish said, showing his identification. I am Police Constable Macbeth from Lochdubh. I need to ask you some questions about Moira Campbell. Douglas's face went carefully blank. I heard she died. Tragic, especially on Christmas Eve. May I come in? The flat was small but comfortable, and it smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Douglas offered tea, which Hamish accepted, and they sat at a small kitchen table while snow continued to fall outside. I understand you entered the Gingerbread house competition in Lochdubh this year, Hamish began. I did. I wanted to prove I could compete with the best. even if Moira Campbell was the reigning champion. When did you last see Ms. Campbell? Douglas hesitated, just a fraction too long. Yesterday afternoon, I delivered my gingerbread house to the church hall around 4. Moira was there, checking the setup. We spoke briefly. What did you discuss? Nothing important. She commented on my house, said it showed potential but lacked refinement. That was typical Moira, always critical. Hamish watched the man carefully. Your family used to run the bakery in Lochdubh. Douglas's hands tightened around his teacup. That was a long time ago. Your mother believed Moira Campbell stole her recipe, the one that won her the Highland Baking Championship. My mother believed a lot of things, Douglas said, his voice carefully controlled. She was ill toward the end. Paranoid. The business failed because they could not adapt, not because of any theft. But you do not really believe that, do you? Hamish said gently. Douglas looked away. What I believe does not matter. My parents are dead, the bakery is gone, and nothing will change that. I came back to Sutherland to build something new, not to dig up old grievances. Where were you yesterday evening between 6 and midnight? At home, preparing for Christmas. Alone. No alibi, if that is what you're asking. Hamish made notes, then looked up. Did you know Moira was planning to retire after Christmas? She was going to announce it at the party tonight. Douglas's surprise seemed genuine. No, I did not know that. She was leaving the bakery to her apprentice, Fiona MacLeod. Everything, the business, the recipes, the reputation. After Hamish left, he sat in his Land Rover for a long moment, thinking. Douglas Kerr had motive, the destruction of his family 20 years ago. But his reaction to the news of Moira's retirement had seemed genuinely surprised. Would he have killed her if he knew she was leaving anyway? Unless, Hamish thought slowly, unless Douglas had not been the primary suspect. Unless there was another person with even more reason to want the baker dead. Chapter 4. The Apprentice's Secret. Hamish returned to Lochdubh as midnight approached, Christmas morning arriving with bells from the church and snow that fell in soft, persistent flakes. The village was quiet, lights glowing in windows, but the usual joy of the season was muted by death. He drove past the bakery, dark and silent now, and thought about Fiona MacLeod, an apprentice who was about to inherit everything. That was motive in itself, but there was something else, something in the way she had hesitated when he asked about Moira's enemies. In the morning, after a few hours of restless sleep, Hamish began his investigation in earnest. He started with the bakery's financial records, which Moira's solicitor provided with reluctance. What he found was interesting. Moira Campbell had been a wealthy woman, but her generosity had been selective. Large donations to baking competitions and culinary schools, but nothing to local charities, nothing to former employees. And there, in the records from 3 years ago, was a payment to Fiona MacLeod of £5,000, labelled as compensation. For what? The records did not say. Hamish found Fiona at her parents' home on the edge of the village, a small cottage that smelled of Christmas dinner and sadness. She agreed to speak with him in the sitting room, away from her family. Tell me about the payment Moira made to you 3 years ago, Hamish said without preamble. Fiona's face went pale. How did you find out about that? Financial records. What was it for? She was silent for a long moment, then seemed to crumple. It was blackmail, she said quietly. Moira was blackmailing me. Hamish kept his expression neutral. For what? Fiona looked away, tears beginning to fall. 6 years ago, before I came to work for Moira, I worked at a bakery in Glasgow. The Kerr family bakery, actually, run by Jean Kerr's sister after Jean died. I was young, ambitious, and stupid. The family had kept Jean's original recipe book, the one with all her secrets. I copied it and gave it to Moira in exchange for an apprenticeship here. Hamish felt the pieces clicking into place. So, the recipe theft was not just 20 years ago. It happened more recently, through you. Fiona nodded miserably. Moira wanted those recipes to expand her business, to create a line of traditional Highland baking. She promised me I would be her partner, that we would build an empire together. But once she had the recipes, she changed, made me a simple apprentice, paid me barely minimum wage. When I tried to leave, she threatened to expose me. And the £5,000? That was what she paid me to sign a contract promising never to speak about the recipes, never to tell anyone what I had done. She said if I stayed and proved myself loyal, she would leave me the bakery when she retired. It was the only way forward for me. "Where were you yesterday evening?" Hamish asked. "With my family, from 7 onward. We had Christmas Eve dinner, then went to the church service at 11. My parents and my sister can confirm it. Did you know Moira was planning to announce her retirement at the party? She told me yesterday morning. Said after Christmas we would make it official, start the transition." Hamish studied her carefully. "Did you poison Moira Campbell?" "No," Fiona said firmly, meeting his eyes. "I hated her for what she did to me, for turning me into someone I never wanted to be. But I did not kill her. I wanted that bakery constable. Killing her would only bring investigation, suspicion, risk. Why would I do that when I only had to wait a few more weeks?" It was logical, Hamish had to admit, but logic did not always apply to murder, especially when emotions ran high. After leaving Fiona, Hamish returned to the bakery, now released by the forensic team. He stood in the kitchen looking at the destroyed gingerbread house, trying to understand the rage that had destroyed it. This was not just about killing Moira. This was about destroying what she had created, what she was proud of. He examined the bowls of royal icing still on the counter. Royal icing was used for decoration, for holding pieces together, for creating intricate details. Moira would have been tasting it constantly, adjusting the consistency, the sweetness. Hamish carefully collected samples of each bowl, labelling them precisely. Then he searched the rest of the kitchen. In the waste bin, beneath discarded piping bags and paper towels, he found a small glass bottle. It was labelled as almond extract, professional grade, the kind used in baking. But when Hamish opened it carefully and sniffed, keeping his face well away, the smell was wrong. Too bitter, too sharp. This was not almond extract. This was something far more deadly. He sealed the bottle in an evidence bag and continued his search. In Moira's office, a small room off the kitchen, he found her personal recipe books. One was newer than the rest, and when he opened it, he saw recipes that had been pasted in. Photocopies of handwritten pages in a different hand. Jean Kerr's recipes, stolen through Fiona and claimed by Moira as her own. But there was something else. Tucked between the pages was a letter, dated 1 week ago. Chapter 5. The letter that changed everything. The letter was handwritten on plain paper, the script neat but shaky, as if the writer had been emotional or elderly. Hamish read it carefully, standing in Moira's quiet office while snow continued to fall outside. "Moira," it began. No greeting, no pleasantries. "I know what you did. I know about Jean Kerr's recipes, about how you convinced that girl to steal them for you. I know about the Highland Baking Championship 20 years ago, how you poisoned Jean the night before so she could not compete. I have proof, documentation, witnesses. You ruined my family. You killed my mother as surely as if you had put a knife in her heart. My father drank himself to death because of you, and you have built an empire on their graves. I am giving you one chance. Withdraw from the gingerbread house competition. Announce publicly that your recipes were not original, that you stole them from Jean Kerr. Make restitution to our family name. If you do not, I will go to the police, to the newspapers, to every baking association in Scotland. I will destroy you the way you destroyed us. You have until Christmas Eve to decide." The letter was not signed, but Hamish did not need a signature. Douglas Kerr had written this, had confronted Moira with the truth, had given her an ultimatum, and Moira had not withdrawn from the competition. Her gingerbread house had been on display at the church hall, ready to win yet another prize. Had Douglas killed her in rage when she refused? Had he poisoned her and then destroyed the gingerbread house as a final act of revenge? Hamish photographed the letter carefully and then called Douglas Kerr. The man answered on the third ring, his voice wary. "Mr. Kerr, I need you to come to the police station in Lochdubh immediately." "Why? What is this about?" "I have found something that concerns you. It would be better if we discussed it in person." There was a long pause. "I will be there in 30 minutes." While Hamish waited, He received a call from the forensic lab in Strathbane. The preliminary tests on the royal icing had been completed. 3 of the 5 bowls were clean. 2 contained traces of cyanide, cleverly hidden in almond flavouring. The interesting thing, the technician said, is that the poisoned icing was in the bowls used for the gingerbread house decoration, not in the icing for other projects. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, knew which bowls Moira would be using for her competition piece. That suggested someone with intimate knowledge of Moira's work process, someone who had been in the bakery, who understood how she organised her materials. Douglas Kerr arrived exactly 30 minutes later, looking grim and resigned. Hamish showed him to the interview room and placed the letter on the table between them. "Did you write this?" Hamish asked. Douglas stared at the letter for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, I wrote it last week. I'd been gathering evidence for months, ever since I came back to Sutherland. I talked to people who worked with Moira, found inconsistencies in her story about the competition 20 years ago. And then I got lucky. I met someone who had worked at my aunt's bakery in Glasgow, someone who knew about the recipe theft." "Fiona MacLeod," Hamish said. Douglas looked surprised. "You know about her?" "I know she gave the recipes to Moira. What I am trying to understand is what happened next." Douglas leaned back in his chair. "I confronted Fiona 2 months ago. She was terrified, thought I was going to expose her, ruin her career. But I convinced her I did not care about her. I cared about Moira, about making her pay for what she did to my family." "Did Fiona help you?" "No. She refused. Said she had too much to lose, that Moira was leaving her the bakery, that she just needed to keep quiet a little longer. But she did not try to warn Moira either. I think part of her wanted to see Moira face consequences." "So, you sent the letter," Hamish said. "I did." And Moira laughed at me. She called me 2 days later, told me I had no proof that would stand up in court, that any evidence I had was circumstantial at best. She said I was a bitter failure trying to blame others for my family's incompetence. She told me she would not only stay in the competition, she would win it, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. Hamish watched Douglas carefully. "That must have made you angry." "Angry?" Douglas's laugh was bitter. "I was furious, but I did not kill her, Constable. I wanted her to face justice, to lose everything publicly the way my family did. Death was too easy, too quick. I wanted her to suffer. Where were you yesterday evening, alone in my flat? Like I told you before, no alibi." Hamish studied the man, trying to read truth from deception. Douglas Kerr had motive, means, and opportunity. But something still felt wrong about this. The violence of the destroyed gingerbread house did not fit with Douglas's calculated approach. And the timing, Christmas Eve, seemed almost too symbolic. Chapter 6. The Poison in the Icing. Hamish spent Christmas Day working, much to Luggs's disgust. The dog had expected a day of treats and laziness, not a distracted owner who kept staring at notes and muttering to himself. The forensic report came through in the afternoon. The cyanide had definitely been in the royal icing, specifically an almond extract that had been tampered with. The amount was considerable, enough to kill within minutes of ingestion. Moira would have tasted the icing multiple times while decorating, as was her habit, and the poison had acted quickly. Time of death was estimated between 8 and 10 in the evening on Christmas Eve. The destruction of the gingerbread house had occurred after death, as there were no defence wounds on Moira's hands, no signs she had fought back or tried to protect her creation. Hamish drove to Campbell's bakery again, letting himself in with the key the solicitor had provided. The kitchen was cold now, stripped of its usual warmth and life. He stood where Moira had fallen and tried to reconstruct the evening. She had been alone, working on the final decorations for her masterpiece. She had been tasting the icing, adjusting the consistency. At some point, she had ingested enough poison to kill her. She had collapsed, reaching for the counter, and died within minutes. And then someone had come in, found her dead, and destroyed the gingerbread house with methodical violence. That sequence bothered Hamish. If the killer had poisoned the icing earlier in the day, why come back? Why risk being seen? Unless the killer had not known she was dead until they arrived. Or unless there were 2 people involved, one who poisoned Moira and one who destroyed the gingerbread house. Hamish's phone rang. It was Fiona MacLeod, her voice shaking. "Constable, I need to speak with you." I remembered something important. They met at the church hall, neutral ground where Fiona seemed more comfortable. She looked as if she had not slept, her eyes red and her hands trembling. "I lied to you," she said immediately. "Not about the blackmail, that was all true. But about Christmas Eve. I was not with my family the entire evening." "Tell me," Hamish said gently. "I went to the bakery around 9. I'd been feeling guilty all day, thinking about what Moira had done. What I had done. I wanted to confront her, to tell her I was not going to stay silent anymore, that I would tell the truth about the recipes, even if it meant losing everything. And what happened?" Fiona's eyes filled with tears. "She was already dead. I found her on the floor just like you did. I panicked. I should have called the police immediately, but I was terrified. I thought people would think I killed her, that I had finally had enough of the blackmail." "Did you destroy the gingerbread house?" Hamish asked. Fiona nodded, shame flooding her face. "I was so angry. Even dead, she had won. That house would have taken first prize. Everyone would have talked about how talented she was, how brilliant. And I knew the truth, knew it was built on stolen recipes, on lies and theft and cruelty. So I smashed it. I destroyed it the way she had destroyed my life, my integrity." Hamish made careful notes. "Did you see anyone else? Was there anyone near the bakery when you arrived or left?" "No. The street was empty. Everyone was at home with their families, preparing for Christmas." "What time did you leave the bakery?" "Round 9:30. I cleaned up as best I could, made sure I had not left any fingerprints, and then I went home. My family was already asleep. They thought I'd been in my room all evening." Hamish sat back, thinking. Fiona had destroyed the gingerbread house, but she had not killed Moira. That much he believed, which meant the killer was still out there, still unknown. Unless, Hamish thought slowly, unless the killer had been in the bakery earlier, had poisoned the icing earlier in the day. He called the forensic lab again. "Can you tell me when the almond extract was tampered with? How fresh was the addition of cyanide?" The technician consulted her notes. Based on the chemical analysis, the cyanide was added to the extract within 24 hours of Ms. Campbell's death. Probably the same day, possibly the evening before. So the killer had access to the bakery on Christmas Eve day, had tampered with the almond extract, and then had left, knowing Moira would poison herself while working. Hamish thought about who had been in the bakery that day. Fiona, certainly, helping with the final preparations. Douglas Kerr had delivered his own gingerbread house to the church hall, but had he stopped by the bakery as well? And then Hamish remembered something the Curry sisters had said. Moira won every year for the past decade. Every year. That was a lot of victories, a lot of people who had lost to her. Chapter 7. The Rival's Confession. Hamish began interviewing the other competitors in the gingerbread house competition, starting with Mrs. Wellington, the minister's wife. She was a formidable woman, known for her strong opinions and her excellent scones. But she also had a solid alibi for Christmas Eve and no apparent motive. Young Jamie Ross from the hotel was eliminated quickly as well. His gingerbread house had been a simple affair, a first attempt, and he admitted cheerfully that he had known he had no chance of winning. That left Douglas Kerr, who had already admitted to being at odds with Moira, and Fiona MacLeod, who had confessed to destroying the gingerbread house but denied murder. Hamish sat in his office staring at his notes. Something was still wrong, still not fitting together properly. The violence of the act, the symbolism of Christmas Eve, the destroyed masterpiece. This was personal in a way that went beyond simple revenge for a 20-year-old wrong. His phone rang. It was Dr. Brodie, calling with the final post-mortem results. The cyanide was definitely the cause of death. But there was something else. Hamish. Moira Campbell was ill. She had pancreatic cancer, stage 4. According to her medical records, she had only been given a few months to live. She was dying anyway. Hamish felt a chill run through him. Did anyone know? Her doctor in Inverness, obviously. But she had requested complete confidentiality. She did not want it to become public knowledge. This changed everything. Moira had been dying, had known she had only weeks or months left. That was why she was planning to retire. why she was leaving the bakery to Fiona. She was putting her affairs in order. But who else had known? Who had she told? Hamish drove to Brakey again, arriving at Douglas Kerr's flat just as the man was closing his bakery for the day. Douglas looked surprised to see him, and something like resignation crossed his face. "You have more questions," he said. "Come in." They sat in the same kitchen as before, but this time Hamish did not accept tea. He went straight to the heart of the matter. "Did you know Moira Campbell was dying? That she had cancer?" Douglas's face went pale. "What? No, I did not know. How long did she have?" "A few months at most. She had kept it secret, told almost no one." Douglas slumped in his chair. All this time, all my anger, my need for revenge. She was already dying. Justice was being served without me. Hamish watched him carefully. "Where were you on Christmas Eve afternoon between 2 and 6? "I told you I was home." "Your bakery is closed on Christmas Eve," Hamish said. "But your oven was on when I was here." I could feel the warmth from the back room. "What were you baking on Christmas Eve, Mr. Kerr?" Douglas was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to a cupboard. He pulled out a tin and opened it, showing Hamish what was inside. Gingerbread. Traditional Christmas gingerbread using my mother's recipe. The real one, not the stolen version Moira used. "Why?" Hamish asked gently. "Because I wanted to remember her properly. My mother loved Christmas, loved baking. Before Moira destroyed us, our kitchen was always full of warmth and good smells and happiness. I wanted that back, even just for a day." "Did you go to Moira's bakery on Christmas Eve?" Douglas nodded slowly. "I did. I went around 5, just before she sent Fiona home. I wanted to see her one more time, to look her in the eye and tell her I would never give up, never stop fighting to clear my family's name." "What happened?" She laughed at me. Again. She said I was pathetic, that even if I proved she stole the recipes, no one would care. She was too successful, too beloved. And then she said something strange. She said she would not be around much longer anyway, that I had wasted my time and energy on a crusade that was pointless. Hamish leaned forward. "Did she tell you she was dying?" "Not directly, but I realized later that must have been what she meant. At the time, I thought she was just being dismissive, implying she was going to retire to somewhere I could not reach her." Douglas met Hamish's eyes. I left angry, humiliated again. I went home and baked my mother's gingerbread and tried to find some peace. I did not kill Moira Campbell, Constable. But I would be lying if I said I was sorry she was dead. Hamish believed him. Douglas Kerr had been angry, had confronted Moira, but he had not killed her. The pieces still did not fit. Unless, Hamish thought, unless someone else had been listening. Someone else who had heard the conversation between Douglas and Moira, who had understood that Moira was dying, and who had decided to act. Chapter 8. The Truth in the Recipe Book. Hamish returned to Campbell's bakery one more time, searching for something he had missed. He went through Moira's office methodically, examining every document, every note, every piece of correspondence. In a locked drawer he found Moira's personal diary. He hesitated before opening it, respecting privacy even in death. But murder investigation required uncomfortable intrusions. The entries for the past few months were revealing. Moira had written extensively about her illness, about her fear and anger at dying, but she had also written about regret. "I've been thinking about Jean Kerr," one entry read, "about what I did to her family. I told myself for years that I deserved success, that I had worked hard, that the recipes were just recipes. But they were more than that. They were June's legacy, her family's heritage, and I took them." Further on, she had written about Fiona. "I've treated her terribly. I used her guilt to control her, to keep her under my thumb. She is talented, more talented than I was at her age. She deserves the bakery, deserves to build something honest and good. I will leave her everything, but I wonder if it is enough to make up for what I have done to her." And then, in the final entry dated 2 days before Christmas, Moira had written something that made Hamish's blood run cold. "Fiona knows about the cancer. I did not mean to tell her, but I was feeling weak yesterday, and she saw me take my medication. She asked directly, and I could not lie. She cried. which surprised me. After everything I have done to her, she still has compassion. I told her about my plans to leave her the bakery to make things right. She said she did not want it this way, did not want to inherit from death. But what other way is there? Hamish closed the diary slowly. Fiona had known about the cancer. She had known Moira was dying, and she had lied about it when Hamish interviewed her. He called Fiona and asked her to come to the station immediately. While he waited, he laid out the evidence, the timeline, the motive. It was coming together now, but not in the way he had expected. Fiona arrived within the hour, looking frightened and defiant in equal measure. Hamish showed her to the interview room and closed the door. "You lied to me about knowing Moira was dying," he said without preamble. Fiona's face crumpled. "Yes, I lied, but not for the reason you think." "Then tell me the truth," Hamish said gently. Fiona took a deep breath. "I found out about the cancer 3 days before Christmas. Moira was weak, in pain, and I saw her taking medication. She told me everything about how long she had left, about her plans to leave me the bakery, and I was horrified. Why?" "Because I did not want it that way," Fiona said fiercely. "I did not want to inherit from someone I hated, someone who had blackmailed and controlled me. It felt wrong, dirty. I told her I would not accept it, that I would rather walk away with nothing than benefit from her death. How did she react? She was angry, said I was being ungrateful, that she was trying to make amends. But I told her amends would be confessing the truth about the stolen recipes, about what she did to the Kerr family. I said if she really wanted to make things right, she should do it while she was still alive, not hide behind death and a convenient inheritance." Hamish watched her carefully. And did she agree? No. She said it was too late, that confessing now would destroy everything she had built. She said the bakery was her legacy, and she wanted it to continue after she was gone. Fiona looked down at her hands. "We argued. It was the worst fight we ever had. And then I said something terrible. I told her I wished she would just die already, that I was tired of waiting, tired of being under her control." "When was this?" Hamish asked quietly. "Christmas Eve morning, right before I left to go home. She was furious. I was furious. I thought that was the end, that she would change her will and leave everything to charity just to spite me. But you went back that evening," Hamish said. "Yes, to apologise, to try to make peace. And I found her dead." Hamish sat back. Fiona had motive, the strongest motive of all. Impatience, anger, a desire to be free of Moira's control. But had she acted on it? "Did you poison the almond extract?" Hamish asked directly. "No," Fiona said, meeting his eyes. "I swear to you I did not. I wanted to be free of her, but I would not have killed her. Despite everything, she was still a human being. And besides, she was already dying. Why would I risk everything when time was going to solve the problem for me? It was logical, but logic and emotion did not always align." Chapter 9. The Unexpected Killer. Hamish spent that evening going through every piece of evidence again, every interview, every timeline. Someone had poisoned Moira Campbell, and it was not Douglas Kerr, and he was increasingly certain it was not Fiona MacLeod. Who else had motive? Who else had access to the bakery on Christmas Eve? He thought about the Curry sisters' story, about Jean Kerr and the Highland Baking Championship 20 years ago, about how Jean had fallen ill the night before the competition, food poisoning that had kept her from entering. Food poisoning, or poison. Hamish sat up straight. What if Moira had not just stolen recipes? What if she had poisoned Jean Kerr 20 years ago to keep her from competing? And what if someone knew, someone who had been close to Jean, who had loved her? Hamish pulled out his phone and called the Curry sisters. When Nessie answered, he got straight to the point. Jean Kerr's sister, the one who ran the bakery in Glasgow after Jean died. What was her name? Nessie thought for a moment. Margaret, I think. Margaret Kerr. Why do you ask? Is she still alive? I believe so. She must be in her 70s now. Do you know if she has any children? Nessie consulted with Jessie in the background. Yes, I think she had a daughter. Emma, or maybe Ellen. The girl used to visit Lochdubh when she was young, spent summers here with John before everything fell apart. Hamish felt pieces clicking into place. A daughter who had known Jean Kerr, who had loved her aunt, who would have known about the alleged recipe theft and possibly about Jean's mysterious illness before the competition. He searched through the bakery records again, looking for any mention of that name. And there, in the list of temporary employees from 6 months ago, he found it. Ellen Reed, hired to help with a large catering order, worked at the bakery for 2 weeks. Ellen Reed, born Ellen Kerr, daughter of Margaret Kerr, niece of Jean Kerr. Hamish called the Strathbane office and asked them to locate Ellen Reed. Within an hour they had found her. She was staying at a bed and breakfast in Brakey, had been there for the past week. Hamish drove to Brakey through the snow, his mind racing. Ellen Reed had worked at the bakery 6 months ago. She would have known the layout, known Moira's habits, known which supplies she used for her gingerbread house decorating. The bed and breakfast owner confirmed that Ellen Reed was in her room. Hamish asked her to call Ellen down, saying there was a matter that required her assistance. Ellen Reed was a woman in her late 40s, with greying hair and tired eyes. She looked at Hamish warily when she saw his uniform. "Ms. Reed, I am Police Constable Macbeth from Lochdubh. I need to ask you some questions about Moira Campbell." Ellen's face went carefully blank. "I heard she died. Very sad." "You worked at her bakery 6 months ago," Hamish said. "I did. Temporary work, helping with a large order. Is that relevant?" "It might be. You see, Moira Campbell was murdered, poisoned with cyanide hidden in almond extract." Ellen's composure cracked slightly. "Poisoned? I thought it was a heart attack." "No, deliberate murder. And I am wondering if you might know something about that." Ellen was silent for a long moment. Then she sat down heavily in a chair in the small lobby. "Why would I know anything?" "Because Moira Campbell destroyed your family," Hamish said gently. "She poisoned your Aunt Jean to keep her from competing in that championship 20 years ago. She stole Jean's recipes and built a career on them. Your aunt died from the stress. Your uncle drank himself to death. And you have been planning revenge ever since." Ellen looked up, and there were tears in her eyes. "My Aunt Jean was the kindest woman I ever knew. She taught me to bake, taught me to love the craft. When she got sick before that competition, I was just a child, but I remember how devastated she was. And when Moira Campbell won with a recipe that tasted just like Aunt Jean's, I knew something was wrong." "How did you know Moira had poisoned her?" Hamish asked. "I did not know for certain, not then, but my mother suspected. She said Jean had been fine, healthy, excited about the competition, and then suddenly she was violently ill, so sick she could barely stand. It did not make sense unless someone had done something to her." Ellen wiped her eyes. "I spent years researching, trying to find proof. I talked to people who had been at the competition, who had seen Moira and Jean together. And finally, 5 years ago, I found someone who admitted they had seen Moira near Jean's kitchen the night before the competition. They had not thought anything of it at the time, but looking back, it was suspicious." "So, you got a job at Moira's bakery," Hamish said. "Yes. I wanted to see her up close to understand what kind of person could do something so cruel. And what I found was a woman who had no remorse, who believed she deserved everything she had stolen. It made me angry, angrier than I had ever been. And you decided to kill her," Hamish said quietly. Ellen nodded slowly. "I poisoned the almond extract on Christmas Eve morning. I knew she would be working alone that evening, knew she would taste the icing multiple times. I wanted her to die the way my aunt's dreams had died, slowly and painfully, surrounded by what she had stolen." Chapter 10. The Justice in the Snow. Ellen Reed confessed fully with a kind of weary relief. She had carried the weight of her family's destruction for 20 years, and the act of revenge, rather than freeing her, had only added more burden. She explained how she had obtained the cyanide, how she had returned to Lochdubh a week before Christmas, staying in Brakey to avoid being noticed. She had broken into the bakery on Christmas Eve morning, while Moira was at the church hall with Fiona, had tampered with the almond extract, and had left. "I did not know she was already dying," Ellen said quietly as Hamish drove her to Strathbane to be formally charged. "If I had known, I might have let nature take its course. But maybe not. Maybe I needed to do it myself, needed to be the one who ended her, the way she ended my aunt. Hamish understood the need for closure, even if it came in terrible forms. But understanding did not change the law, did not excuse murder. The case made headlines across Scotland. The story of a baker poisoned on Christmas Eve, of stolen recipes and family revenge, was too dramatic for the media to resist. Detective Chief Inspector Blair took credit for solving the case, naturally barely mentioning Hamish's role. Hamish did not mind. He had no need for glory or recognition. He had the satisfaction of knowing justice had been served, even if it was complicated and messy. Fiona MacLeod inherited Campbell's bakery as Moira had intended. She changed the name to Kerr and Campbell's, acknowledging the legacy of stolen recipes and making a public commitment to honour Jean Kerr's memory. She reached out to Douglas Kerr, offered him a partnership, a chance to restore his family's name. Douglas accepted, cautiously at first, but gradually warming to the idea of building something new from the ashes of the past. Together they created a bakery that was honest and collaborative, free from the shadows that had haunted both their families. The Curry sisters had enough gossip to last them years. The village of Lochdubh slowly recovered from the shock, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of Highland life. And Hamish Macbeth returned to his peaceful existence, walking lugs by the loch, dealing with lost sheep and minor disputes, grateful for the quiet corners of the world where drama was the exception rather than the rule. On a cold January morning, as snow fell softly over Lochdubh, Hamish stood at his kitchen window with a cup of tea, watching the light change over the hills. His mind wandered to Ellen Reid, sitting in a cell in Strathbane, awaiting trial. He thought about Moira Campbell, dying alone on a bakery floor, her face dusted with powdered sugar like some grim fairy tale. He thought about the Kerr family, destroyed by ambition and theft, and about Fiona MacLeod, trying to build something good from the wreckage of lies. Revenge, Hamish reflected, was supposed to bring satisfaction, closure, peace. But in his experience, it only ever brought more pain, more loss, more darkness spreading like ink in water. Ellen Reid had gotten her revenge, had killed the woman who destroyed her family. But she would spend the rest of her life in prison, and the Kerr family's pain would continue, just in a different form. There were no winners in this story, Hamish thought, just people trying to survive the consequences of old wounds and bitter choices. His phone rang, shattering his philosophical mood. It was Blair, of course, wanting him to deal with a noise complaint in Lochdubh. Some things never changed. Hamish smiled despite himself. He gathered his jacket and called to Lugs, who emerged from under the table with the long, suffering expression of a dog who knew adventure was about to interrupt his nap. "Come on then," Hamish said. "Let us go see what trouble the village has got itself into today." As he drove through the snow, the hills rolling white and peaceful around him, Hamish felt the familiar contentment that came from being exactly where he belonged. This was enough. This village, these people, this life. The Gingerbread house case was closed. Ellen Reid would face justice. The Kerr family would find some measure of peace, even if it was incomplete and bittersweet. And in Campbell's bakery, soon to be Kerr and Campbell's, the ovens would warm again, and the smell of fresh bread would fill the streets of Lochdubh, a reminder that life continued, that from darkness could come new light, that even from tragedy could grow hope. It was not redemption, perhaps. That was too clean a word for the messy business of being human. But it was something. And in the Highlands, sometimes something was enough. The snow continued to fall, soft and persistent, covering the village in white, making everything clean and new, at least for a little while. And Hamish Macbeth drove on, keeper of the peace, watcher of the quiet places, guardian of a world where justice was complicated but necessary, where the past haunted the present, and where every ending was also, somehow, a beginning. The end.